All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for the panel. Wow, that was amazing. So many key takeaways. Excited to talk about that in the speed networking and in the happy hour. Please stick around for that. Right now, we're about to do our podcast with Miles Montes, one of our leaders, fresh off of Techstars Demo Day. Really excited to have Miles here, and he'll be speaking with Andrew Lisy of DoorDash, Director of Product Management, and excited to hear what they've been up to in the last wild couple months. So, Miles, why don't you take it away from here?
Excellent. Thanks, Ethan. Also appreciate the shout out on Techstars. Great. Well, welcome to the podcast portion of the summit. My name is Miles Montes, and I'll be your host today for the Product in LA podcast, where we highlight product leaders in LA building great products. The Product in LA podcast was founded by me, Cassandra Campbell, and Kevin Sakamoto in partnership with PMA LA. And I'm also the co-founder and chief product officer of Shop Latinx. Now on to the best part. Today, we welcome Andrew Lisy, Director of Product at DoorDash. Andrew, thanks for joining. And Andrew, it looks like you're on mute.
Hold on.
There it is.
Meeting if the first 5 seconds weren't people asking if you could hear them. Am I good now?
Yeah, you're good to go. Yeah, thanks for joining. So Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here.
So I guess starting kind of way at the beginning. I think like a lot of people probably at this webinar, I've always really been interested in how things work. So like for me, it's how do you take something really complex and like ultimately like magical, a computer or something like that, and then break it down into smaller and smaller parts until you figure out how those parts work and how they come together. So for me, kind of product is a little bit of the opposite of that. You take some really big goal and you take something exciting and you figure out how do I build a bunch of parts together and ultimately get to that that kind of magical end state. So it's kind of really been like a little bit the theme in my the underlying interest for me in technology throughout my life. So that kind of career-wise and academic-wise, for that general like childhood interest led me to MIT for college. While I was there, I studied basically two different areas that deal with pretty complex and interesting systems: computer science and also finance. Particularly derivatives and financial markets. And right out of there, the kind of the most obvious, the most interesting and obvious place to go with that background is into financial or quantitative trading, because basically what you're doing is you're using one really complicated system, which is computers and networks, to crack into another really complicated system, which is the financial markets. So I spent about 5 years or so as a trader, putting together models and algorithms and systems to try to ultimately get edge over everybody else. And I think for me, when it kind of clicked over and when really my career started to take a turn over into product was while I was a trader, I started getting really involved in building trading systems for not only myself, but also the rest of the company I worked for to use. And I did that for a while, and I was at a hedge fund at the time and working with some really, really great technologists. And after a little bit, after a couple months, I realized the thing that was really getting me out of bed in the morning and the thing that I was most excited to do was not my day job, which was trading. It was the platform I was building and the systems I was creating kind of with those technologists. So that's really kind of where I took that turn into product. I'll pause there, in case you have any questions or anything like that.
Yeah, no, that's honestly, many product managers have different paths, but you seem to have like the perfect duo, right, between computer science and finance. How has, coming from a finance lens, how has that helped you as a product leader, with being able to understand the unit economics of your business as a product manager when, many product leaders don't typically have a view into that, or maybe as they get a bit senior, they start to have a view into that?
Really when it comes down to it, when you're trading, what you're trying to do is break down every single price into its constituents. So, when you look at the price of a share of Apple, why is it that way? What are the long-term things that cause the price to be one way? What are the short-term implications of who's in the market and who's participating and who's a buyer, who's a seller, that may distort kind of that longer term price. And then you try to figure out, where should it be? And for product, it's similar. What you're trying to figure out is, when you look at, say, unit economics for a product, what are the fixed costs in there? What are the things that you can't move? What are the areas that you think if you were to wiggle an input one way or the other, you could have a big impact on kind of how that unit economic comes out in the end, and ultimately trying to figure out where do you get the most leverage from changing inputs and getting the result as an output. And I think a lot of it kind of maps into that prioritization mindset that we all have as product managers.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's a lot of great points there. I suppose many of our product leaders here don't have that finance quant background, but at the end of the day, those are the same advice that you just gave is what you need to know as a product leader in order to know that this product is going to be viable in the market. But with that said, let's talk about how you started off as a PM then. What was that inflection point?
So, as I said, I started getting really involved building trading systems and kind of realized that this is where I wanted to take the next step of my career. Obviously, and there may be people on this call that are, considering a career change or considering moving into product. And it's always hard to figure out kind of what that path looks like. For me, I was in a career I didn't really love. I loved the systems aspect, didn't love the other side of it, or I had grown bored with it. So figuring out how to make that move was definitely something that, wasn't completely trivial. For me, the way it ended up working was, I found a job as a product manager, just like an entry-level product manager at a company that built trading software. So I was the advantage I had was I knew trading really well. I had enough, computer and system knowledge to be dangerous, I guess, but, certainly wasn't an expert there. But spent time there, took a ton of time really understanding customer needs, kind of layering that over, the skills that I did have, leading into the strengths that I brought to the table and trying to, learn as fast as I possibly could, where I had the weaknesses. And then, after a couple of years of doing that, I had an opportunity to go, what I think of as like full on product manager, not like, trading product manager, at Groupon. And the pond at Groupon, being a company with tens of millions of users and, really, really big scale, was really an area where, I was able to grow tremendously. There are some terrific leaders there, some terrific engineers, terrific partners. And I was there for about 5 years. And, I would say that's kind of where, really the product leadership angle was really kind of cemented for me.
Excellent. Groupon is definitely a book, it's in the lean startup, right? I mean, Groupon is everywhere, which is great to know that you have that background. So let's talk about, how you ended up at DoorDash. I know there's a story here that everyone would love to hear because this is a move that I know people are probably thinking about in the audience, and you made that move during COVID and quarantine.
So after about 5 years at Groupon, like I said, I had a great time, great career at Groupon, but I was looking for a change. I was looking to basically join something earlier stage and really kind of lead product. That wasn't DoorDash yet. So I went to a startup that did commercial real estate office space leasing. So it was a marketplace for office space. I was there for about a year leading product. Great company. I think the space, ignoring the last 6 months, the space is phenomenally interesting. It's very old school. It's just waiting to be disrupted. Unfortunately, when COVID hit, it became to some degree a lot less fun to build products because your customers kind of sort of didn't exist in a lot of ways. Everybody kind of went home. There are certainly angles for some sort of commercial real estate marketplace, but I don't think we had quite the right aspect of it. Nevertheless, I was in and dedicated and thought it was was ideally going to ride out the storm. But then, right around the time I was kind of thinking about, whether I should stay or go, the DoorDash opportunity came up. Someone I had formerly worked with at Groupon is now at DoorDash, and they gave me a call and kind of pitched this really interesting role, and basically the rest is history. I took the jump and went over there.
Awesome. So, big decision to make. And while we're here, I know there was a question in the panel prior about, what if I'm looking for a role right now, what should I do?
We are actively hiring really across the board, but certainly in LA. So please ping me. My last name, Lisy, at DoorDash. I can put that at DoorDash.com. I can put that in the chat as well. Also have roles in several other offices across the country. So would love to hear from you, and definitely we're actively looking to add PMs to the team.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Andrew. So next topic. So, has the pandemic been the most pressing emergency you've been through as a product leader? And, if so, let's, that must be, I wonder what that is. And if it isn't, then, would love to hear more about, the challenges during quarantine here.
Complicated question. The most pressing is there's different types of pressing, I think, and it's hard to answer this one. A lot of things about the pandemic were like crazy out of left field, like the idea of basically taking a team that used to sit within feet of each other, and now all of a sudden they're spread across the country. Certainly has a bunch of challenges just organizationally and executionally. From a roadmap perspective, obviously things that weren't originally like top of the list, suddenly became top of the list. For example, how we need to make sure we're building tons and tons of trust and safety into our marketplace. That's always been really important to DoorDash, but even more so with with the pandemic. So I think it was absolutely pressing. It was just different in a lot of ways. And, there have been times in my career where the company did a major pivot, and you had, huge big numbers that you had to hit, within a quarter or two. And obviously that's like a different kind of pressing. But to some degree I would say, that's a little easier in some ways because, you kind of have the team in the playbook and it's more just about execution. Whereas the pandemic to a degree was kind of throw the playbook away, while you're also trying to, to transition to a very different roadmap. So I guess I would say it's probably the most pressing, but it's a tough question.
It is, and thank you for that. So knowing that is the most pressing, or at least the most challenging, what prior experience prepared you for this change? And if so, would please elaborate.
As a product manager, as a product leader, it's kind of, I think a lot of folks on this call and in this webinar would probably agree that it's kind of drilled into you that you can never just sit back and be comfortable with what you're doing. And if you are, that's probably not a great sign. So to some degree, I'm like the way I operate and the way, I see my teams operate, my partners operate is really to never settle in and be comfortable with what's going on, even in the most, quote unquote, boring of times, because there's always threats. There's always competitors. There's always, other external, internal factors that, really could knock you down if you're not careful. So, I would say like, if you're in that mindset already, it like, while it doesn't make it easy by any stretch of the imagination, obviously there's still crazy curveballs. If you've built that muscle where, you're always trying to do something different or push the envelope or test and learn, and you're trying to stay ahead of kind of that, that next big thing. I think it prepares you well, or at least as well as possible for handling kind of the major curveball of the pandemic, because you go back to what they say in the military, go back to your training and you're like, all right, sit back, see what's going on, figure out how you prioritize what you got to do, and then execute. And, I think as long as you can kind of fall into that and, and stay ahead, I think we come out okay.
Yeah. So knowing that, Andrew, I know in the earlier session, one of the panelists had mentioned that they, went into the war room and they went in there and had to figure stuff out, on the fly. And I've also even, recently, even on Guy Raz's show on How I Built This, there was an episode on Yelp, right? Around how they had to pivot. So did you have that moment of wartime where you had to go in and make some tough decisions, and how did those conversations go? Like what direction came out of it?
So I think our CEO, Tony Zhu, he's got a really great way of framing for DoorDash kind of how the pandemic, how he looks at the pandemic and how it's affected us. And the way he thinks about it is it's not a complete shift. It's not like a, completely new world, completely new business. Instead what it is it's pulling up the needs of our customers and our merchants. It's basically turning what we have today and accelerating us into a 2023 world. So, we have systems and processes and procedures that, that are built the way they're built today. But, because of the pandemic, we all of a sudden have all these needs that we didn't think we'd have until even 3 years out. And what he kind of pushes on us and encourages us to do is think about how we accelerate, how we close that gap, because, if we're going to keep dealing with 2023 problems with 2020 tools, that's not how we're going to get ahead of what's going on here. So really for us, and more concretely, my world is among other things is customer experience and post-purchase support. So the way we have that framed and the way we look at every interaction is really around hospitality. So we think about how are we making customers feel? How are we treating them? In a 2020 world for us, this is largely accomplished through our agents, through the personalized communication that they're having, with their customers. When we think about 2023, agents are still going to be tremendously important. People are always going to want to come and talk to somebody, but what we see more and more, and I'm sure other folks have seen this as well, is support has to get automated. We have to start building in technologies and tools and processes, chatbots and machine learning and things like that, to handle more of this without a human interaction. And for us, the technologies, those are table stakes, but the challenge for us, and when we think about how we pull today's world into a 2023 world, is how do we take that same view of hospitality, that same view of treating customers right and personalizing it, and frame that in a world where more and more of our customers want automated solutions. And how do we make sure it's not just a sterile menu bot or something like that, but still provides a personalized and customer first experience?
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple really good points there. In many businesses, right, in industries, our customers are looking for more automation, better user experiences. I don't want to pick up the phone type deal. But at the same time, we're also balancing the fact that, hey, should we automate this? Will this actually make it a better experience? Will we lose the human touch? So how do you now, knowing that the pandemic has kind of sped that up, based on what you're saying about your CEO, how do you guys balance that conversation now in your product decisions?
Great question. For us, everything has to start with the customer experience. So what we don't want to do is go automate everything, but ultimately degrade how happy our customers are with that interaction. Long term, that's not a good thing for our customers. It's not a good thing for our business. It's not really a good thing for anything. So it has to start with that customer. So what we're doing is really what we've done to on my team and kind of across across some other pods, is really model out, like, what are some of the best, when we think about hospitality and we think about amazing customer experiences, who are the best people in the industry? What are the best experiences they're providing? What does that look like today? And what might that look like in a world where customers choose to get their solution in a more automated fashion? So everything from ensuring that customers know that even if this is an automated solution, they can always talk to a person with no additional problems. That's super important. Making sure even in an automated solution, customers feel like the chatbot, for lack of a better term, knows who they are, is empowered to help them, isn't going to waste their time. These are all the hugely important tenets of what I think of as really good customer interaction. So it has to start with kind of that good old fashioned analog world. What does this experience look like? And then you kind of map that into the tools that you need to build, but it can't be the other way around.
Right. I love the idea of finding companies in the world that you believe are the best at what they do. So for DoorDash and maybe for your teams, what's one company that you guys look at and say, you know, that's the customer experience that we want to bring into DoorDash and maybe a different model?
Think of what a good what a good example is. Often, everybody always says Zappos. Zappos is great. I want to give a slightly better, a slightly different example. We'll say there's a book that I think is really, really terrific on this topic. It's called Setting the Table by Danny Myers, and he's a very famous restaurateur. Has a bunch of extremely successful restaurants in New York. One of the things I love that stuck out from that book is he talks about what I think all of us would consider the bad customer experience of when a customer shows up and their table isn't ready or their reservation didn't occur. So what they do at one of his restaurants, Union Square Cafe, is they, like a lot of restaurants, they take you to the bar, but instead of just dropping you off and saying, hey, wait for your table here, they pour you a glass of very specifically, they pour you a glass of sweet wine, and they pour you a glass of like a very high quality sweet wine. And over time, people started to know them for the sweet wine. So they would come there because last time they were there, they had this kind of bad experience, but they were introduced to this like really interesting wine that was great on their palate. And it turned this really terrible experience into actually something that people were going and bragging to their friends about. And I think that's a tremendous example of how you can turn, what for a lot of people would be, really like to some degree, like a nightmare experience, especially if they just straight up don't have your reservation, and turning it around and doing something unexpected, but really delightful for your customers. And then ultimately, making that really a net promoter feature, more than a defect.
Love it. That's a gold mine right there. So we're going to have to plug that book later. Do you mind repeating that one more time, what the book was, just so everyone can grab that?
The Table. It's by Danny Myers.
Gotcha. Okay, great. We'll probably share that.
It's not like 100 other business books you read. It's from a very different angle, which I think is terrific.
And you know what? Those tend to be the best ones, because I feel like anytime you read books that are very like specific to product, you lose some of that perspective that we need to work with as product leaders. So let's jump back. I know we were talking more around the leading product teams during crisis. So how did safety factor into any of the decisions that were made at the strategic level, and maybe safety from a customer standpoint and even your teams?
I think for everybody paramount these days. For us, we have a three-sided marketplace. We have customers, our consumers, the people who are ordering the food. We have our dashers, the folks who are delivering the food, and then we have our merchants. We want to make sure that all three of them, as our customers, are safe. And then obviously, as you mentioned, really important that our merchants are safe. So it's really a number of things across the company. We were the first platform to default to contactless delivery. That was a huge thing for us. Obviously, if our dashers aren't feeling safe, that when a customer opens the door, that they're not that they're going to be too close or something, that's going to be very hard for them to do their job safely and effectively. So we introduced that. That was a really interesting feature because it sounds trivial, but contactless delivery makes it more difficult to ensure that the delivery was completed, the customers are getting food the right way. So there's a lot of technology and a lot of product behind that. Across the board, from a less technological perspective, but I think also very important. We were very, very upfront and very, proactive in getting safety equipment to all of our customers, all three of our, or at least our dashers and our merchants. So that was very important to us. And then also evolving our app in a number of ways to make sure that, if customers felt unsafe, particularly from a COVID type issue, they had the ability to reach out to somebody that was trained to provide them a good resolution, and other ways to ensure that they're happy and trust the platform and feel safe. So, really cut across. It wasn't just one area. It really cut across our entire platform, because what we do is obviously heavily person to person, so it's super important to us to keep everybody safe.
Yeah, and that's the contactless delivery option is definitely something I know I've utilized. So really, and I guess in even that respect, how did that conversation come up? That couldn't have been in the roadmap, right? So how did that change things when you guys started to have product roadmap discussions around building new like enhancements and features that one might have maybe not be as strategic, but now like this would be more delightful, but actually, like, I guess, what are your thoughts around it?
Like, I think although it wasn't necessarily top of the roadmap, I think, when COVID hit and when it became a thing, it was very quickly evident that it was strategic and it was important. Just because, just for the mere fact that, as I was saying before, like if customers don't feel safe and don't feel like they can trust the platform, that's not the experience we want to provide for them. So, that feature, among others, I think came into fairly crisp focus as we kind of figured out, what the implications were and what the needs were, for keeping our customers safe. So, we plan out on a quarterly cadence, and I think even in times when when things are going crazy, like we try to keep we obviously keep ability to flex the roadmap, and I think COVID was as good of an excuse as any to to make sure that you're evaluating everything currently in the roadmap and figuring out, is this the best stuff to be doing this quarter. Anyway, I think it is strategic. We look at it as a core value proposition and not just a nice to have.
Yeah, that's great. And it did change the game, right? I think some of even your competitors adopted it. So at least you guys were ahead of the game. So let's talk about EQ a bit. How did you deal with feelings of panic from any of the product teams or even your execs or even folks from the board? How was that managed? How did you think about that?
Interesting. I think the EQ is maybe a slightly there's two ways to look at this. I think I'll come back to the EQ part because I think that's super important. But I think the first thing I'll say, and I kind of said this before, was as a PM, like you have to kind of have that, like I think they call it OODA and the military: observe, orient, decide, act. Like you have to have that mentality where something crazy happens, people are panicking. Like you can't just send engineers on a new thing every 2 days because something else comes up. Because what will happen is you'll end up with essentially nothing. So I think we had to kind of I certainly had to lean back, and especially my teams had to lean back on the skills that that we use in peacetime as well. But obviously kind of accelerate some of those, but but really look at everything coming in, all of the things that stakeholders wanted, things that we wanted to do, new areas that that we wanted to explore, but still look at them from a really realistic prioritization lens. And obviously in times like COVID, there may be things where like you want to get a quick test out, and we certainly had a lot of stuff like that to try to get something out as quick as possible. But at the end of the day, it's still a prioritization exercise. It's still assessing impact. It's still figuring out where you get the most reach impact for your effort, and kind of leaning back on those, taking in everything that you could, as I said, everything that you could think of, everything that stakeholders wanted, and then getting back as quickly as possible with a coherent roadmap that was going to get where you wanted to get. I think is super key and helps keep people from panicking and ending up with a roadmap that doesn't actually move anywhere.
Yeah, that's solid. I think the roadmap question is always the ever evolving one, but I like how you give that analogy around just having that. I think you described it as OOAD. Did I say that right?
Orient, decide, act.
There you go. So I think most product leaders just learn that on the fly, right? Where you got to release something, and that's the date you set. And if things change, then you got to be that person. You're always the bad guy, but you have to be that leader in that role to really provide that confidence to your stakeholders. Great. So with that said, what mistakes did the product team make during this time, and what did you guys learn from it?
Looking back to the last question you asked me around, like, how do you deal with panic? I think the initial direction that kind of everybody goes is again, like, disrupting that roadmap and ultimately, like, ultimately spinning. I don't think we went too far into this, but it was definitely an area that we were keenly watching to make sure that we didn't. And what I mean by that is, when things happen and you're trying to do fast stuff and getting stuff out, getting kind of not bug fixes, but, for lack of a better term, quick wins, or, stop the bleeding type stuff out. I think that's important. You have to do that from time to time, but you also have to be really, really careful that that you have a path out of that, because if it lasts too long, where the product team's roadmap is a number of kind of small things that don't add up to something really big that moves the needle, you're going to look back in a quarter or two and realize that, you're kind of still in the place you were, or you're probably even more stuck there, and you don't have a path out. So, I don't think we made this mistake super heavily, but, one of the things that we were watching really closely, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, was ensuring that we had the right balance of get stuff out and move really, and get stuff out and and kind of stop the bleeding type stuff, or quickly pivot. But also we knew where we were trying to go with those pivots, and it wasn't just it wasn't 100% reactive all the time. We had a balance of a longer term view, even if that longer term meant only a few months or only a quarter or two. We wanted to make sure that everything we built ultimately built up to to something that was going to help us come out ahead, really.
Okay, so it seems like you got that quiet confidence going on, which is great, especially during a time like this, which I'm sure you probably had some product leaders in your group that you had to help instill that confidence that, hey, this is the direction that we're going in, and let's move there together. So knowing that we have to manage that as product leaders, what changed between your one-on-ones with some of the folks on your team, and did you recognize anything different from that?
Some of the younger folks, especially on my team, being your career, and you haven't seen a lot of things change and bumps along the way. I to get a little bit spun around when stuff like this happens. So a lot of the conversations, were really like, what does this mean? How are we collaborating? Like, is this, kind of reestablishing the expectations for the role? And I think, people want some sense of stability, even when the world is going a little bit crazy. So, I think kind of being there and having that, like, it's going to be okay kind of mentality was super important. And I think our leaders did a great job of doing the same thing, a level above, where, they reinforced, hey, like, it's business as usual. We're not like, we're not like, completely turning over the entire roadmap or anything like that. We're kind of staying the course, and we still expect great things out of everybody and all of that. I think, certainly coming down to me, that's immensely reassuring. Like, the last, again, going back to your conversation about, like, panic and everything, the last thing you want to feel from your leaders is panic. And, I tried to reflect the same thing to my teams, which is, we are geographically remote, but we're going to figure out how to work and how to do the things that we're doing every day, in the same way. And, and I'm still there for you the same way, even if we're not sitting next to each other. I'm a phone call or a Zoom away. But, ultimately, like, this is, we're going to keep running the way we're running. And I think, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, just that that stabilizing effect, I think was really valuable, especially as the rest of the world went a little crazy.
Awesome. So let's get this last question in, and then we'll spend the rest of the time, the next 5 minutes on Q&A. So to wrap it up, what type of team building activities have you been able to do now that everything is remote first?
To be really honest with you, the last thing I feel like doing, and I've kind of pulled my team asking the same thing. The last thing I feel like doing, after a long day, is like having like a semi-mandatory team happy hour on Zoom. Like, after 10 hours of Zoom straight, it's mostly what I want to do is get off of Zoom. So I've been found that to be super effective. There are really two things that I've found to be most useful. And again, I haven't really cracked the code on this one, to be very candid. The two things that I have found useful are, one is one-on-one meetings. So basically 3 people in a meeting. The intent being like basically no agenda, just kind of talking with people and checking in. If you haven't tried that format, I find it to be very different from a one-on-one. And what ends up happening is, I think it's a little bit less businessy. It's a little bit less pressure on each person, because there's, now there are 3 people that can kind of converse together. And you find if you get the right group, people kind of play off of each other, and you can get a really good conversation going that isn't necessarily all business 100% of the time. So I've really found that a good way to meet other folks, or re-engage with people I haven't talked to in a while, in a way that's not like 100% all business. And I think that's really important, because I think Zoom kind of pushes everybody to be all business most of the time. And I think what I've really felt tends to lack during the pandemic is that like just casual kind of have fun time. So the one-on-ones have been a pretty effective tool. And there's a plugin called Donut for Slack. I haven't actually used it for this, but I've heard of a lot of people that have, and they've had some really good reviews on that. The second thing, again, kind of with the topic of just getting the team to like have fun together, is, and this is super, super easy and kind of trivial, but it also works really well, is for our team meetings, we've been doing like a Zoom background theme that I try to make like a little bit like, I don't know, a little fun, or a little like, off the rails a little bit. And let's see, what have we done? Like one was like, I think it was like your favorite food that's like not like your favorite like non-obvious food, or something to that effect. So people were talking about like their favorite ethnic cuisines or stuff they like to make. Let's see, I had like, one of them was like a picture of you when you were 10 or more years younger. So that's kind of a fun one to just talk about time in your life. But I've gotten to know a lot of like really interesting things about my team through this. One guy likes to do motorcycle tours around the West Coast on the weekends, and a woman on my team, recently climbed Half Dome, and it worked out perfectly where like she was one of the only people there, which was really cool. So you kind of get that like to some degree like serendipitous conversation from it, and we'll spend the first 5 or 10 minutes of our team meeting talking about that. And as I think one of the panelists said before, like, I don't think that 5 or 10 minutes is wasted time at all. I think that's really, really important time where you get to kind of, blow off a little bit of steam and get to know people. So I found that to be pretty useful as well.
Yeah, I've personally used Donut, so I know it's great. It can be tough at times because it'll connect you with somebody, right? And you got to schedule something on the calendar, and it has that Zoom effect, But what I found that's worked is just being very intentional, very conscious that not to talk about work when you get on those donut calls, right? Or those one-on-ones. Let's forget about product for 30 minutes, and let's talk about, what's going on in your personal life. How are your kids doing? How's school going? I know that conversation is a tough one, right? And actually, maybe that's a good question to even ask, right? I believe you're a parent. How is that, how has that changed, your daily life and your role as a product leader when, your time is very demanding?
I will say I'm shocked that you guys have not yet been introduced to my kids. They are very interested in what Dad's doing, in the bedroom with the door closed. So they were yelling earlier that, you know, one of them was mad that we weren't going to go on a bike ride tonight, but he'll be fine. I think you know, you got to be, probably even more so these days, especially as we're working from home. You just got to be really, at least for me, I have to be really regimented on like when I'm getting all, like the time that I'm you know, shutting down Zoom or Slack or whatever, and the time I'm declining meetings. I'm in Chicago. A lot of my coworkers are in San Francisco, so I'm 2 hours ahead. For me as a parent, it's really important to have those times, because, you know, I'm making dinner for my kids. I'm putting them to bed. Oftentimes I'm getting back on at, you know, at 8 or so. He's talking under the door in case you can't hear. So you know, you have to make sure like that has to continue for me. You know, it's ultimately a non-negotiable, because, you know, it's like, as a parent, that's my number one responsibility. So you know, but I think the nice thing is like there's enough flexibility, at least in a lot of companies these days, and DoorDash for sure, that that it's really not a big problem. You know, I can get all my meetings done, you know, before 6 o'clock Chicago time, and you know, I have some time in the morning and some time in the evenings if I need, and you know, as long as you kind of like, you know, have the right regimen and right schedule, I think it hasn't been too much of an issue.
And you were optimistic and super positive. I've heard some wild stories about, one, you deal with Zoom at work, and then you got to deal with Zoom with your kids, and getting them to stay in one place. But yeah, I mean, that's, you know, commendable. Being a parent during this time, I know, is challenging, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. So anyways, let's jump into Q&A. I know there's a few questions here that have been asked. So I'll take the first one from Vishal. Hopefully I said that name correctly. But the question is how does product management differ from DoorDash to Groupon?
I think that's a very good question. There's actually a lot of similarities, partly due to the fact that the head of product at DoorDash used to be the head of product at Groupon. So the headline answer is there's a lot of shared DNA there. You know, what's similar is the planning cycle. You know, how we're looking at planning out every quarter, how we're looking at you know, goals and objectives. I think what's different about DoorDash is planning is a lot more cross-functional. You know, the process and the cooperation between what I'll say is like business or operations folks and product is a lot richer and a lot more you know, a lot more productive in a lot of ways. And you know, I think that's been terrific. You know, the product kind of day-to-day execution, you know, looks fairly similar, and I think it'd be familiar to, you know, to folks at a lot of companies, which is you know, we're trying to generally stick to that roadmap. You know, we have goals, we have you know, areas we're trying to hit. You know, we're running a lot of the similar, you know, what I think of as like ceremonies around Agile and Scrum and that kind of stuff on the day-to-day to ensure that things are getting executed, that you know, that goals are getting hit. So I think there, like I said, there are a lot of similarities there. You know, I think both companies run a pretty good product ship, and you know, and that's been a good thing.
Awesome. Yeah, you know what? And that's you know, I think that's a lesson for everyone here to really know, right? Is that once you kind of enter the product field or you have an opportunity to be in that role, you really should build those relationships, because those relationships long term will serve you well when you're looking for other roles. And I know for me that is 100% true as well. So anyways, there was a couple add-on questions here to that same one. Do you think that once the pandemic is over, people will go back to a regular way of dining? And if so, how does DoorDash, what are the plans to make up for that situation if it happens? I think I have my own conclusions on that one, but I'll let you take that one, Andrew.
I think and I hope, as someone who loves restaurants himself, I think and I hope people will go back to dine in a lot of ways. I don't look at them necessarily as complete substitutes. typically when I'm going out for dinner, with friends or with my wife, we don't sit down and say, should we order takeout or should we go out for dinner? We're going out for dinner largely for entertainment. And the reasons we'll order takeout are other reasons. Do we want to cook tonight, or do we want to order food? So I don't know if you can quite say like it's one versus the other, and it's hard to say what happens to order volume against the pandemic. I don't quite have the crystal ball there, but I think in general, as I was saying before, in a large degree, like our customer needs and our merchant needs have been accelerated a couple of years by this pandemic. And, people are introduced to takeout that may not have ordered takeout before. And, the question of whether they stay, whether they go, again, I can't answer, but, it's obviously for companies like DoorDash, it's good to have more people exposed to your product. So, so I think that's a beneficial thing. As far as, I don't look at it as how do we make up for that situation. I think instead the way to look at it is, how does DoorDash continue to evolve and continue to provide a ton more value for our merchants, for our customers, to keep, to keep them coming back. And, for us, that means, how do we introduce more products? How do we introduce, new users to the platform? And how do we ensure that our value proposition for our merchants continues to be really good? And, I think we're executing pretty well on that.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to this, that, the saying that, like strategy doesn't stop. So, with that said, Andrew, thank you so much for joining. It's been great hearing how you've led your teams during this tough time. I'm Miles Montes again, and you're listening to the Product and Ally podcast. Ethan, sending it back to you.